Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual event, a webinar. My name is Jason Bordoff. I am the founding director of the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, professor of professional practice at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. And I'm really delighted that we have the ability to have this conversation today about the excellent new report from the International Energy Agency on energy technology perspectives, which was released just this morning in Paris. I think this is a very important topic for us to be talking about. We all know that innovation is key to combating climate change and achieving a more secure and just and prosperous clean energy future. The prospects for decarbonizing the power sector in the rapid time frame climate change requires looks much brighter today because of dramatic cost declines in renewables and storage capacity. But we also know, as this report points out, that while we can electrify certain segments of the energy sector, like passenger transport or parts of heating, and we can use much more renewable energy for that electricity, many sectors will be harder to electrify, like heavy-duty transport, shipping, aviation, heavy industry. And this report is a really valuable resource to help explain the suite of technologies that will be needed in the IEA's sustainable development scenario, and also a faster decarbonization scenario, and the important role that policy and particularly government investment in R&D can and should play in that. And you'll hear more about that from my colleague Varun Sivaram, and also an excellent new report the Energy Center at Columbia will be releasing shortly, with a roadmap for how government should scale up investments in clean energy R&D. Let me just first quickly say that this event's being webcast live. The full video will be available online in the coming days. For those of you joining via Zoom, you can submit questions for the panelists at any time by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And for those watching the live stream anywhere else, you can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag CGEPLive and our Twitter handle at Columbia U Energy. So I'm delighted to introduce such a distinguished panel to be with us today. Our keynote speaker needs no introduction to anyone who pays attention to the energy sector. My friend Dr. Fatih Birol, who is the executive director of the International Energy Agency, and as he writes in his foreword for this report, really was had the idea many years ago to develop a sort of marquee product at the IEA, helping us understand where energy technology was headed. Thank you for the work. And all of your colleagues, and particularly Timur Gul, who is head of the Energy Technology Policy Division at the IEA, will join us as well and present the report and give us more detail on it. Dr. Cheryl Martin is the founder of Harwich Partners. Previously, Cheryl served as head of ARPA-E and served on the managing board of the World Economic Forum. And then my colleague at Columbia, Dr. Varun Sivaram, the idea for this event came from him, as so many other ideas have for work that we are doing at the Energy Center on energy innovation and technology. He joined us recently as a senior research scholar. Before that, served as the Chief Technology Officer of Renew Power in India, and is the author of a great MIT Press book on solar innovation. So thanks to all of you for joining us and making time to be with us. Thank you especially, Fatih, for making time to be with us. I know it's a busy day in Paris releasing this report, and for sharing the insights from it with everyone here. Let me turn the floor to you for some opening remarks, Fatih.
Thank you very much, Jason, and it's a great pleasure to see you, Varun, Cheryl, and many colleagues in Colombia. And I am thankful to you for thinking of us once again to present our report. We have launched our report this morning, and I knew that there was a vacuum on a serious book on energy technologies, but after we published the book, I understood that there was really a vacuum, and I am very happy the first reactions we get. If I may, Jason, I want to do two things. One, to put the 2020 year a bit in a context, how we see it in September, as of 2020 September now. And the second, the book was excellent, as you will see in a moment. But I would like to have three takeaways I wanted to put on the table, which may be important for the US audience, but also globally. First of all, about this year, I mean, 2020 has been a grim year, no question about that. We have a global pandemic, and plus an unprecedented economic crisis across the world. But I believe, despite these developments, there is one area, namely clean energy transitions. I see increasing grounds for optimism. So this is a bit of a, it may sound a bit of a contradiction, but I am optimistic now, 2020, in this grim year, more than ever. And I want to give you 4 brief reasons why I am somebody who is pessimistic by nature, is optimistic now in the clean energy transition area. Number 1, the solar is bringing renewables to new heights. Not only the solar electricity generation costs are becoming the cheapest source of electricity generation around the world in many, many countries. This is one issue. As important as that, I believe, when you look at the last several years, the solar growth came mainly from China and a few other countries, but China was the main driver. But now it is everywhere. From Vietnam to Brazil, from Middle East to Europe, it's going everywhere. It's not anymore a China issue. And this is one. And the second, again, the same context, offshore wind costs are, as we have expected a few years ago, in fact, 1.5 years ago, offshore wind costs are also plummeting. So this is the one reason why I am optimistic. The second one is the interest rates. The main hurdle for many clean energy projects is securing the initial investments. And as the fuels are basically for free. The massive easing of monetary policy by central banks in response to economic crisis means wind, solar, electric vehicles should benefit from ultra low interest rates for an extended period. And this could, we believe, help the clean energy investments, which require hefty initial investments. This is number 2, being optimistic. Number 3 reason being optimistic is many governments around the world, many governments, the advanced economies, emerging economies, are putting the environmental agenda as a key issue. So in some cases, it is the air pollution. In some cases, committing net zero 2050. Both of them are helping to advance clean energy transitions. As for example, in some countries in Asia, the main driver of solar is because it's cheap and because it's good for air pollution, such as India, for example. It is, I wouldn't say that the big push in many Asian countries is not driven by climate change, but it doesn't matter. It helps the clean energy transition. So this is what we are seeing. Many governments are throwing their weight behind clean energy transitions. This is the third reason why I am optimistic. Now, fourth and the last reason why I am optimistic is the companies. Many companies are stepping up. This is the international oil and gas companies. They are pushing it very strongly. Many cases, solar, wind, hydrogen, CCUS. Some of them are because of the pressure coming from the citizens, their investors. Some of them are seeing this as a real business opportunity and to position themselves better for the future. Or in some cases, perhaps a mixture of this both. And it is not only the energy companies, many giant technology companies are also pushing the clean energy. So putting these four reasons together for drivers, I feel today in this grim year, more optimistic for clean energy than ever. Of course, this doesn't mean that the challenges do not remain. And one of the challenges, as Jason, you mentioned, accelerating of innovation and clean energy progress. And therefore, it is extremely important to have the governments choosing the right technologies to put emphasis on, or the investors is the same. And I told Timur, who is our able division head for energy technology perspective, I said, Timur, there are many technology books here and there, but we need to develop a guidebook for clean energy technology for the governments around the world. This was the main idea. And Timur and his colleagues, almost 3 years, they analyzed over 800 technology options, how mature they are for the markets, what is the challenges, what are their possible contributions to the addressing the clean energy. They analyze everything, 800 different technologies, and they come up with this report. And we see that their report covers all the technologies that we talk about. Now, in the report, there are many interesting findings, guidance for the policymakers and others, but as I said, I would like to choose only 3 of them briefly. First, when we look at the climate change debate today in Americas or in Europe, everywhere, there is a big concentration, in my view, disproportionate concentration of the debate, policy attention on the electricity generation. This is very good, of course. Electricity generation is very important, but electricity generation related emissions today are 38% of the total emissions. So 62% comes from somewhere else. This is number one. And when we look at the future, even if we transform the clean energy, clean electricity, if we can have a clean electricity sector in the future, we make only reach one third of our goals, net zero emission goals. So we need to look beyond power generation. This report tells us, and that it tells us that transforming the power generation alone will not bring us to our energy and climate goals. This is number one, and I think it is an important factor. The second one is an issue that Jason knows. In fact, we had an exchange on this issue in August, if I'm not wrong, Jason. There is a need to address the emissions from existing infrastructure. Now, what we always discuss, the next power plant should be solar, wind. Next aluminum plant should be sustainable. Next car should be electric car. This is one question, whether or not they will be, but even they are all sustainable, if we do not address the existing infrastructure we have today, not only power plants, but the industry sector, a big emitter, namely iron, steel, aluminum, cement. What are we going to do with that? We cannot solve those problems with the strong slogans or with tweets. We have to come up with right technologies. And when I read the book, CCUS and hydrogen emerge as very promising technologies. Without addressing this vast fleet of coal plants, cement factories, aluminum, iron, steel, basically no chance whatsoever to reach our climate goals, especially the net zero 2050. Impossible. This is impossible. So what we have done, we have looked at all the power plants one by one in the world. Big chunk of the aluminum, iron, steel, cement factories, all one by one. What is their size? What is their performance? Emission factors, their age. Because the problem is most of them are very young. Very young. Dr. Gil is going to show it to you. Very young. What do we do with this? I think this is a major issue. And this is one of the most detailed analysis ever done at a global scale on all the industry sectors, every car, every power plant, all the energy infrastructure stock. What do we with that? This is the second issue we come from this report. Now, a third point, and the last point, my takeaway from this is that the report shows, because we look at all of the technologies and their maturity level. Are they ready for market, not ready for, how far they are from the market? We look at them. When I look at the Dr. Gül and his team's analysis, especially three technologies, CCUS, hydrogen, and batteries are ready for the big time. They are there, in my view, broadly speaking, where solar was some 10 years ago. So this is, I think, very important point. And when we look at what happened 10 years ago for solar, one word, governments. We cannot, if we cannot leave everything to the markets, there is a need for governments from different ways to support this process. And therefore, my concluding remark is that the governments will determine the fate of these technologies, and as such, whether we can reach our energy and climate goals. So with this, Jason, I wanted to finish here. These are the three takeaways for me. Power generation is not alone enough to decarbonize it. Second is the incredible weight of the unbearable weight, I should say, of the existing infrastructure we have in the climate change question. And the third one is that the governments will determine the fate of the technologies which are ready for the big time. So these are the 3 points I wanted to mention. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you for that excellent overview, Fatih, and the work that you and your team did. Really important insights from the report. As you mentioned, I reached out to you and we spoke a few weeks ago because I wrote my most recent column in Foreign Policy magazine about that challenge of the existing infrastructure. About we are still building new coal plants, but even if we never built another new coal plant, if the existing fleet runs to the end of its normal economic life, that alone will put us over the targets in the Paris Agreement to combat climate change. So this is an enormous challenge. And then the role of government you mentioned is very important. I wanted to ask you about that. When you look at what governments are doing today and how stimulus funds are being spent, we've developed, if people look at energypolicytracker.org, the Energy Center is part of a consortium of groups that are trying to track how stimulus money is spent, and not enough of it is being spent on clean energy. But even that money that is often focuses on deployment, electric charging stations, or supporting more solar and wind deployment. Obviously, we need climate policy and regulation too, like limits on emissions. But this report says, if I understood it correctly, that in the sustainable development scenario, a third of the technologies, a third of the cumulative emission reductions needed to achieve that scenario stem from technologies that are not commercially available today. And if you want to move even faster to get net zero emissions by 2050, fully half of the cumulative emission reductions needed to achieve that stem from technologies not commercially available today. So does that tell you that we need to be reshifting the balance and the focus a little bit more equally between innovation as well as deployment?
Very much so. I mean, this is the, we think, Jason, one of our jobs, responsibilities, whether or not we are fulfilling that responsibility, I don't know, but to try to educate the discussion, a pedagogical discussion, pedagogical responsibility we have. And here, what I would like to say is that many of us think that just the increase of solar and wind, we can solve this problem. It is not, we cannot, impossible. Numbers are there. I mean, this is, and you just need to look at the numbers very calmly, that you see whatever happens in solar and wind, even the most aggressive scenarios anybody has, it is not enough. Because the emissions going from power sector and from the cement industry has the same effect. The emissions from cement sector is not, they are not more innocent than the emissions coming from the power sector. So therefore, it is very important to have a holistic approach here. And if we want to look at the cement, in the iron steel, or the aluminum, we need innovation. We need innovation. We have to push this innovation button, and a few countries are doing it, but it is far from being enough. So therefore, if I have to pick up, I said the first, if I have to pick up one word from this book, it is government. The second word, if I have to pick up, it is innovation. And I completely agree with you. This is extremely important. Otherwise, solar and wind will make big support, big change, but it will not be enough at all.
And what do you think you want? What do governments need to do? It's, I mean, I think saying we need to increase investment in clean energy innovation and technology is one thing. The question is what you think works best and is most effective. What do you see countries doing today that is working well? What do you think they should be doing, including with stimulus fundings? And what role can institutions like the IEA and Mission Innovation play in fostering that kind of collaboration?
Jason, what we are suggesting governments is the following. We need clean energy technologies. In order to reach clean energy technologies, we need more innovation. In order to foster the innovation, we need research and development and incentives to push those. And these incentives, this R&D, may well be in the stimulus packages you have mentioned. Some countries are doing it. Many European countries, the day before yesterday, France came up with a new recovery plan. It is much in line with our sustainable recovery plan. Some countries are doing it, and but I wouldn't be saying the truth if many countries are doing it now. So we need more R&D and more direct and indirect incentives for innovation of new technologies. And here, some countries are even pushing the button, for example, in terms of the electrolyzers, to bring the cost of electrolyzers down, not because of the climate change reasons, because they want to have a good position in their industrial strategy vis-a-vis other countries. And some countries in Asia, for example, are pushing it very strongly because of the having a good position for the next industrial battle they are going to be. So any country who does not push the innovation for clean energy technologies not only risks to be behind in the climate change, addressing the climate change, but also can be well behind in terms of the next industrial competition as well.
And can you just say a word before we move to your colleague to go deeper into the report on how you see innovation needs differing and the technologies differing between advanced and emerging economies? Does the roadmap for innovation and technology look very different?
There are some advanced countries which are doing better than the others. there are some emerging countries which are doing better than the others. For example, hydrogen electrolyzer, lots of innovation, lots of work in Europe, especially north of Europe, but also in Japan. And in terms of batteries, we know that some major Asian economies are doing very well. Once again, some of these innovation efforts are driven by climate change, climate change, some of them by the industrial positioning themselves in the industrial competition for the next one, having a foresight.
Did anything surprise you particularly? I mean, you looked at 800 different technology options. Did anything surprise you about something that is much more promising than you realized, or less promising?
I didn't expect that the electrolyzers, the cost of electrolyzers can go down quickly, may go down so quickly as I thought we needed more time. But Dr. Gül made his PhD on hydrogen. He may be a bit biased, I don't know, but when I look at the numbers, there is a good promising picture for electrolyzers, because the biggest problem with the hydrogen is the cost of electrolyzers, and if we can bring the cost of electrolyzers down as a result of mass manufacturing, then we can make a very good thing for the climate and for energy security.
Fatih, thank you for being with us this morning and for your leadership and everything you're doing at the IEA, but driving this report forward. And please stay with us as long as you can. I know it's a busy day in Paris as you release the report. And if we could now, let's turn to Dr. Gül to present us with some more of the details of it.
Yes, thank you, Professor Bordov. Great to be here with you. Good morning, I shall say. Even though it's now afternoon here in Paris. Good to see you as well, Varun. Thanks for initiating today's event. Very nice to meet you, Cheryl Martin. Excellent to be here with all of you today in this particular webinar. So, as Dr. Birol already outlined in his speech, we released this report, Energy Technology Perspectives, just this morning here in Paris. It's the first edition after having taken a pause, really, for this report. The last edition was launched in 2017, and ever since we've been reflecting on how can we actually use this kind of report most appropriately and also in order to answer real technology questions that are on the minds of all the decision makers around the world. And the report that was launched today is the outcome, with the guidance of Dr. Birol, to create a guidebook on clean energy technologies in the most pedagogical type of senses. Now, the background to today's report is, we have already touched upon this, are the very many pledges from many governments around the world, increasing number of governments, in fact, many companies, different types of industries that are looking to reach net zero emissions sometime over the next couple of decades. And what we wanted to understand in this particular report is, what do these pledges actually mean in practice? And more concretely, what do these pledges mean in clean energy technology practice? As Dr. Birol already highlighted, there's of course a lot of reason to be optimistic on clean energy transitions more broadly. We have seen major uptakes on clean energy technology, solar PV, on and offshore wind. Battery costs have fallen significantly as electric cars made it into the market. So there is a lot of positive momentum on clean energy transitions and clean energy technology going on. But this should not be a reason for us to be complacent. The energy sector is much broader, is very broad. We're going to be talking about this in a couple of minutes. And so an energy system transition to net zero emissions will of course require much broader technology efforts. In the report, and this is also what I'm going to be talking about here in this today's presentation in particular, we identified 3 critical areas of attention. Number one, Dr. Birol already mentioned it, is how are we going to deal with existing assets from the energy sector more broadly, but most importantly, from power generation and from heavy industries. Second, how to accelerate clean energy innovation. We know somehow broadly which technologies can help a transition to net zero emissions, but it is wrong to think, and Professor Bordorf already pointed to some of our key findings here, it is wrong to think that we all have all of these technologies ready just yet. And finally, the third point is about really the infrastructure that we need in the future, the clean energy technologies that we need in the future, and the infrastructure that will enable their deployment moving forward. What I will do now in the next couple of minutes is going through these 3 points one by one, and starting really with the existing infrastructure. It's important to recall that energy sector emissions come today from a very wide variety of different sources. They come from the cars we drive, the planes we are flying, the trucks that deliver our goods. They come from the heat or the way we produce the heat for our homes, the electricity for our homes and factories, and they come from the very many different industries that produce the critical important materials that we need, such as cement to build our houses and roads, steel to build our bridges and cars, or plastics to produce the packaging that we need. Now, the problem with today's emissions is, and you can see it already in this picture, is that they're very, very long-lived. They are quite sticky. They stick around for many decades. The problem is somewhat largest, as you see here, in power generation and heavy industries. I think this point has been discussed over the years also from the perspective here of IEA, that coal-fired power plants in particular have a lifetime of more than 50 years. And so those plants that have been recently been built will stay around for long. But what we're pointing at in this report today is that the situation is not all that different in many of the heavy industries. In fact, the average lifetime of many of these assets is somewhere in between 30 to 40 years, and they can be operated for much longer. We have analyzed the entire energy infrastructure today, and according to our assessment, this infrastructure will continue to emit around 750 gigatons of CO2 emissions over the next 5 decades if they continue along current operations. What this basically means, and I think you can see it here very nicely on this picture already, it means that it will not be possible for the energy sector to be fully decarbonized by the year 2050 unless we find a way to address these emissions. It is, of course, possible to do that. We can change the way these plants operate. They can be retired early. They can be retrofitted with CCUS and continue operating as low carbon options. But it's important to remember that there is no one single optimal pathway of doing this. No one size fits all type of approach. Much will depend here on each country's own circumstance, and the age of the facilities in the different countries is a key factor here. If you look at the power sector, for example, 80% of existing coal power capacity in emerging Asia operating today was only built in the last 20 years. In United States or Europe, the age is roughly double. So these plants in emerging Asia will continue to be operating for many decades to come. As I said earlier, this is not a case just for coal-fired power plant, but it's a question that goes much broader, in particular in various different industrial assets. Think about iron and steel production, for example. This constitutes today about 7% of global energy and process-related CO2 emissions. The plants that generate most of the emissions in this sector, blast furnaces, DRI furnaces, they have a typical lifetime of around 40 years and can obviously also be operated for much longer than this. What you see in this picture here is that more than half of global steel production is today in China, and we estimate that it has been around 12 years on average since these plants either were constructed or went through a major refurbishment. 12 years versus a typical lifetime of 40 years. Similar picture emerges when you look at cement production, which is responsible for another 7% of energy and process-related CO2 emissions. Here again, the typical lifetime is around 40 years, the average age much lower, as you can see. China is today home to just over half of global cement production, and the assets are just under 13 years old on average. Similarly in India, where the fleet is also young, vis-a-vis the last time they have been refurbished or have been constructed. Finally, there's the chemical industry and its many different outputs: ammonia, methanol, high-value chemicals. The sector today is responsible for around 4% of energy and process-related CO2 emissions. The majority, as you can see here, of current global productions is in Asia, the red parts, and in the Middle East, the gray bars here. Against the typical lifetime of 30 years, many of these assets are in fact much younger. The good news is here that there is an opportunity that comes with the investment cycle. Many of these facilities need a major refurbishment significantly before the end of their lifetime. On average, this is about 25 years in the cycle of operation. The order of magnitude of investment that you're talking about is comparable to those of a brand new plant. So it's a significant investment that is undertaken. And if by the time of that investment cycle, you have the technologies that could provide for a clean energy transition available, and what I'm talking about here is obviously CCUS, and is obviously hydrogen, depending on the sector, of course, then you can change course in these sectors very rapidly. However, many of these plants run into their next investment cycle sometime over the next decade, within the 2020s. So it is really important here to be timely with clean energy technology deployment. Now, how can we reach our global climate goals? What are the sectors, what are the technologies to look out for the global energy sector to reach net zero emissions? The obvious point of departure here is the power sector, which, as Dr. Birol highlighted, contributes to almost 40% of energy-related CO2 emissions today. There is, of course, no pathway to reaching net zero emissions in the long run without a decarbonization of the power sector. It is absolutely essential, of course. It is one of the first sectors in our projections that decarbonizes entirely, but decarbonizing power alone, as Dr. Birol highlighted, will not get us to net zero emissions. It is actually only 1/3 of the way to reaching net zero emissions. Very similar story for electric cars. Again, there is no pathway to net zero emissions without building on the recent successes for electric cars, scaling them up further, but electrifying passenger cars alone will again not be sufficient for us to get to net zero emissions. The problem is, and as I said that earlier, that the energy sector and its emissions are much broader, much more varied. They come from airplanes, ships, trucks. They come from various different industry sectors, as the ones that I've mentioned just before. They come from the building sector and from many others. Transport, buildings, and industry together today globally make up for around 55% of global CO2 emissions. So having the technologies for addressing these emissions in these end-use sectors is actually a very critical part of a strategy to reaching net zero emissions. Now, what are the technologies? How can we actually achieve net zero emissions in the long run? We will need many. In fact, when it comes to decarbonizing end-use sectors in particular, then there are 4 strategies that stand out. Electricity, of course, electrification, using batteries and electricity more broadly. It is about using clean hydrogen. It's about CCUS, and it's about bioenergy. And we can, of course, discuss, and we have laid out our projections for various different subsectors on what could be the clean energy technology choices as you're reaching net zero emissions in the long run. We can, of course, discuss how this looks in various different country contexts, or how things might otherwise be developing. Much will depend on the government and business choices that will be made over the next 10 years. But what we cannot negotiate is the importance of clean energy innovation. In our sustainable development scenario that reaches net zero emissions by the year 2070, 1/3 of the emission savings that are required come from technologies that are today either at large prototype or demonstration level, so they're not yet commercially available. We've also analyzed the faster innovation case that reaches through technology, through innovation, net zero emissions by the year 2050, and the share of emission savings goes up from pre-commercial technologies to almost half. We actually need some technologies that are only at small prototype or even laboratory stage in order to achieve that goal. I realize, of course, how this is counterintuitive at times. We are used to all these success stories for solar PV, for batteries, wind, etc. We're all reading the energy news, and they are always full of new projects that are coming online, hydrogen-based steel making, new carbon capture projects, electric trucks, hydrogen trucks, etc. But the reality is that many of these projects that we're reading about still require a whole lot more innovation to be viable. And this is particularly true for heavy industries and long distance transport, so ships, planes, trucks, as well as the various different industry sectors that I talked about earlier. 3/4 of all the emission savings in our faster innovation case to hit net zero emissions by the year 2050 come in these sectors from technologies that are currently at early stage of adoption, so or at pre-commercial levels. Now, I mentioned earlier we have 3 topics that we look into in our presentation, in our discussion today. We looked into how to tackle emissions from existing infrastructure, what it requires on the clean energy innovation front, and the third point is to push the buildup of new clean energy infrastructure. Why we need this infrastructure is pretty clear when you look at electricity, for example. To reach net zero by the year 2050, in our fast innovation case, we would need about 2.5 times the level of today's electricity generation to electrify our cars, trucks, homes, industries, but also to produce clean hydrogen through electrolyzers, synthetic fuels, etc. This will require a lot more transmission and distribution infrastructure, but it will also require a lot more renewable capacity installations. When you look at last year's record high, which was just shy of 200 gigawatts, and you look at the largest solar complex that is available worldwide today and is actually in India, then the renewables capacity installations that we would need to satisfy this huge electricity demand out to 2050 for reaching net zero then would require renewable capacity additions that are every year 4 times larger than the record high that we have achieved, which would mean in practice the largest solar park that we're seeing here today being installed every 2 days. Similar situation for hydrogen. The current installed capacity is just below 200 megawatt. Installed in the largest facility in operation today is about 10 megawatt in Japan. The project size for electrolyzers is growing as we speak. This is pretty obvious, but if you look at the projected requirements in terms of hydrogen production, clean hydrogen production, and the electrolyzer capacity additions that would be needed to support them, they would be equivalent to installing such a plant, putting it in practice every hour from now to 2050. And finally, CCUS. Progress in CCUS technology was somewhat behind expectation over the past decade, but it is a technology that will ultimately be needed in certain applications. Cement, for example, to remove CO2 from the atmosphere or to produce synthetic fuels. We will release a special report on this topic towards the end of this month. So if you're interested in this technology, certainly stay tuned on that. The most comprehensive, if you want, complex CCS project that is currently underway is in Norway, the Northern Lights project. And if you put the projections into that perspective, into the CO2 capture that is taking place there, then what you would actually require is the equivalent of 1 Northern Lights project every week out to 2050. Now, these are all very strong numbers, very daunting numbers in some ways. On the one hand, on the other hand, we have seen great progress in many different areas, but we needed across various different fronts. I would also like to emphasize that this is a technology kind of perspective at reaching net zero emissions. Obviously, consumer behaviors, changes in consumer behavior can somewhat moderate the needs, but they cannot eliminate the needs for clean energy technologies and clean energy innovation. Let me sum up here by coming back to the one word that Dr. Birol highlighted in his introductory remarks as being front and center in some ways, which is governments. The scale of the challenge involved with reaching net zero emissions means that there is an absolutely vital role for governments. Markets can do a lot to mobilize capital, catalyze innovation, but ultimately it is for governments to make sure that we reach net zero emissions. 5 areas of policy making have been identified in our report: tackling emissions from existing assets, as I mentioned earlier, strengthening markets for technologies that are currently at early stage of adoption and still require a push on the innovation front, but also for bringing them into the market. Third, it's about developing and upgrading infrastructure that enables technology deployment in different sectors. It's a boost for RD&D, given the fact that many technologies are still not commercially available yet, that we will need to reach net zero emissions. And finally, it's about expanding international collaboration. The scale of the challenge involved with net zero emissions means that there's no one person or one country or one company that can do this job alone. So there's a strong case for international collaboration in existing fora. Thank you very much for your attention. And with that, back to you, Professor Brodov.
Thank you, Timur. That was excellent, really interesting. I want to hear reactions from Cheryl and Varun, but let me just ask 1 or 2 clarification questions first. So I just want to make sure the audience watching, many people talk about different goals: 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees, net zero by 2050. So you showed 2 scenarios there. Can you just make sure everyone knows what the sustainable development scenario is and what it achieves, and how that is different from net zero by 2050?
Yes, of course. So our sustainable development scenario, in fact, integrates 3 key goals. It is a trajectory in terms of temperature increase that is compatible with reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement to stay well below 2 degrees on the one hand. Second, it achieves the goal of universal access to energy, both for electricity, but also for clean cooking all around the world, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And third, it is a scenario that minimizes air pollution, right? One of the biggest threats to our health. Now, the temperature increase that we are facing over the course of the temperature will ultimately depend on the pace at which we are reaching net zero emissions. So the earlier, the better, and the lower the temperature increase, and on the idea of how many emissions you can afterwards extract from the atmosphere after the point you have reached net zero emissions. We don't make an assumption of what's happening in terms of negative emissions, full negative emissions after the projection period, but ultimately this is what it means. But with this scenario, you're sitting somewhere in this set of scenarios, you're sitting somewhere in between 1.5 to 1.8 degrees.
And can you just say a quick word about...
Yes, may I say something just to add here?
Please.
Yeah, I'm sure you are surprised that I am still around.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, no, Timur gave an excellent answer, but I wanted to say that following the ETP we just published, we are going to publish in October 13, the World Energy Outlook. It will also look at what is well below 2 degrees, and what is even, how does the world look like even if you go further down, and even have much radical cuts in the emissions, whether or not this is possible and what are the consequences of that. So this will be a follow-up of the ETP in that respect, in terms of our contribution to the climate change debate.
Thank you. We'll have you back to talk about that. I look forward to it. Timur, I just wanted to ask what the methodology is for determining the technologies you're talking about. Is it just a cost? This is the lowest cost way to get to these goals, or are you looking at other factors about the feasibility of scaling up and deploying them?
We are looking at all of them, of course. We have a very comprehensive modeling framework that covers 800 different technologies, process types across all the various different sectors, from fossil fuel supply to various different transformation sectors. So power generation, refineries, hydrogen production, etc. To various different end-use sectors. We are using different type of modeling techniques here, simulation tools, optimization tools, in order to understand what the prospects are. But of course, as you're looking to go into deployment levels, as we're talking about here, there is no historical precedence at this type of level of technology uptake.
Great, thank you. Cheryl and Varun, you've been waiting patiently. I would love to hear your comments, thoughts, reactions to the report, and comments more broadly on what it's going to take to get us where we need to be. Cheryl, let me turn to you.
Yeah, let me jump in. I want to just congratulations Timur and Fadi and your colleagues. Very, very impressive. 3 years in work to bring this forward. It's impressive. And to take the scenario that you did, the sustainable development scenario, and actually allows people to be active and on board with broader country interests and people's interests, right? And I think that's really important if we're going to talk about what's the narrative of why people's behavior should change and they should be part of this. So I think that is a tremendous aspect of this. I think in looking at this report, those of you who asked for the link and are just starting to open that up, 400 pages, really deep. The depth and breadth of this, again, very impressive. I think that the thing for me that was very compelling, the connectivity and interlinkages that you draw, right? And so yes, I'm sure people will disagree, and should certain things be in there at the way they are, but that interconnection and that call to action, I think, does speak through this report. And I think anyone who's sitting with a group of folks looking at we a piece of industry, we a piece of government, academics, should look at these interconnections. And the way that you laid out the TRLs and the color coding of those, I think, again, easy to see, the little bit of sort of supply chain ecosystem look, and the color coding there makes it very both digestible and gives you indigestion at the same time. I think it's very intimidating when you look at this, right? And it's a lot, but I think that those ways that you presented things. I also really love the tables where you show technologies, TRL levels, how important it is. And then you give a little bit about the status of deployment. And I think for a lot of us, we get anecdotal, right? We can get in our own sound bubbles about what's going on. And, I might love to cite a certain example, but probably missing pieces of what's going on around the world, and maybe feeling something's further along or further behind than it might be. And so I do, again, encourage people to really dive into some of these, places in there where there's these summaries put up. For me, I'm passionate about deployment. So I immediately went to the end, chapter 6 and 7 of this report is like, okay, I'm going to leave it to Varun to look in the detail of which piece and how and all those things. But, for me, not only were the percentages that you cited of how much technology that's in early development needed, 30 to over 50% to reach the scenarios. But in that faster scenario, you assume 40% faster time to market. And, for me, as we look at, the linchpins of this are hydrogen, which is then connected intimately to carbon capture, and bioenergy, which is attached to carbon capture, and also a lot of sustainability questions. As you get to that, and then direct air capture, I think, how do we do innovation faster? And how do we get through this demonstration phase, right? And I think we sometimes are a little myopic of, we want to research things and we want to deploy things. And how do we appropriately look at this engagement in the middle? And a couple of things, again, compelling for me. the charts that you did later on the benefit of the existing infrastructure and interceding to pull it back if you can get in at these 12, 24, 36 year refurbishments and come up with the right mix of incentives and commitments to change those, allows those assets to drop out or be refurbished in different ways. So I think from an infrastructure piece, the magnitude of that impact, I think, should be encouraging as well, that's very real. I think on the flip side, our ability to take hydrogen, bioenergy in the infrastructure associated with those, right? I think that's a big lift. I'm not sure in the time that I've really had to digest it, that it comes through as clearly how we do that. And I think that's where the piece around the road mapping that you encourage governments to do and commitments to that becomes really important, because I feel like we could get competing and potentially inefficient infrastructure decisions going on across the breadth of what needs to happen. The other piece for me that I thought was encouraging, certainly we almost take it for granted, the building efficiency benefits that are baked into all of this, right? And the fact that those are there, but then you also overlay the increasing importance of air conditioning as people do get access to electricity, as we have more climate change impacts, hotter worlds. But the opportunities there, again, they're not as big a piece of the report, but some of these things on district cooling, really interesting alternatives there that I think are particularly important. And the other piece for me that I'm sure is on your TBD list is you talk about recycling, material use, the benefits of efficiency. It gets you into a little bit of the circular economy, but the essential nature of that, as we're assuming that we can put in, the equivalent of a Tesla gigafactory every month between now and 2050 or 2070, I guess is what you say. The importance of that, and are we considering and encouraging the entrepreneurs who are in those spaces? So for me, it was already an amazing, report. And I think as I digest it more, I'll have more insight here. I do think it's a call to action for the governments, but I also think for companies, you have a chart in there that shows the company's commitments by sector. When you look at it by sector, it doesn't look that impressive, but I think it should be encouraging to folks to join platforms, right? How do you reduce risk? How do we move faster? We've got to move faster together. And so the RE100 platform, right? Using those tools. There's even things like if you're interested in building decisions, right? For built infrastructure, companies make decisions about their building infrastructure all the time when they go to put new assets down. What about the awareness of things like the embodied carbon in construction calculator, right? That's out there that allows efficient use of the environmental product disclosure forms to really help people with tools. So I think there's a lot out there. I think helping to connect the dots and connecting these platforms to those will allow those corporate commitments to be not only go up as commitments, but to go up as action, which in my book is what we all really need. So I'll turn it over to Varun to jump in on this, but that's a few initial thoughts.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll just flag questions coming in as I go, and maybe you can take them up when we come back to everyone at the end. But you mentioned efficiency, and there are a couple of questions to more about the connection between innovation and efficiency. And do you actually see innovation happening that will dramatically increase the potential for energy efficiency, which we don't always talk about enough? Just a quick follow-up, Cheryl, for you, and then I'll turn to Varun, because you ran RPE, and I was wondering if you could talk about the role of government. You mentioned deployment and how important that is, how you think about, I mentioned in the beginning that we have a report Varun and some colleagues did coming out soon that I'm excited about and proud of, looking at how you would scale up in a significant way government investment in R&D. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw in government and what you think, if we were going to make a significantly larger government investment in research and innovation, how you think about what to do with that, how it would work, and how to scale ARPA-E, a project to large-scale demonstration and then mass deployment, what the role for government is there.
Sure. So, when I was at ARPA-E, we were in the first 5 years, right? So we were in that startup stage. But I think we've seen, in the 10 years that ARPA-E has existed, it's moved from funding, well over 800 projects to really having some start to hit the market. And I think recognizing that you have to have people whose ideas at scale matter. Like, you have to do that analysis to start with, fund the right things that will matter. So the mantra of ARPA-E, if it works, will it matter? Look at it at an agency level and say, what else has to line up in the ecosystem to make it matter? So where can we remove barriers in advance, be it regulations that are written historically for another technology space that may inhibit these coming to market faster? Where do we have to think about the types of demonstrations that should happen? Are there places that we should centralize how that happens? ARPA-E right now is a funding opportunity out looking at doing those demonstrations. If you were an ARPA-E project in the past, you can apply for that money. But then the partnership with the rest of DOE and honestly other agencies, right? We have to be able to have a more fluid handoff between what's happening at the federal level through the various agencies, but also leverage the state, right? New York State, Jason, where you're sitting, is, of course, right, trying to look at how do we actually move offshore wind. And it can be everything from testing and measurement systems that can be funded there, looking at aggregating demand across the New England states who could benefit from that offshore wind. How do we help look at, as we did with solar, what are the hard costs and what are the soft costs? And so, I hate to say this, it's like all of the above. As you look at deployment, you have to think about it from beginning to end and look at it and start engaging people well before they have to be involved, right? Showing up, it's like running a relay race. If I run full speed and I stop and hand you the baton, we are never going to win. And we don't have time for that. And so I think we have to be more thoughtful about how do we encourage and incent people to be more thoughtful about that as we look across agencies. I think we have great people across the world, but I think we have to be more thoughtful and not do start-stop so often.
Great. Varun, your work has been invoked several times, not just work that is forthcoming, but pictures of things like massive solar plants in India, which your former employer, I think, was the developer of. I would love to get your thoughts about the report and any other reactions you had to the discussion so far.
Thanks so much, Jason. Dr. Burrell, wonderful to hear from you. Timur, you as well. And Cheryl, always a pleasure. Cheryl and I were texting all of yesterday as we digested this enormous report. It is a phenomenal accomplishment. Look, I want to make just 4 points about what was salient to me and what I'd like the folks watching to know. And I hope you take the time to look through the 400 tremendous pages of the ETP. The first of the 4 points was alluded to by Jason early on. We often think of climate change as largely a deployment problem. If you look at the range of climate policies that people talk about, there are dozens of deployment-related policies, and there's a small section of folks who think about innovation, right? Innovation is kind of one policy among the dozens of climate policies. And I think that gets the emphasis wrong. This report is the first one that quantitatively shows us that innovation and deployment are sort of on the same level. In fact, quantitatively, they are at the same level. As Timur showed us, 1/2 of the emissions reductions by 2050, if we want to swiftly decarbonize, come from technologies that have not reached commercial markets at any scale yet. They're demonstration, they're at prototype scale. And if you think about it, the remaining 1/2 of emissions that are coming from more mature technologies, like a rapid scale up of solar and wind, those emissions reductions may proximately come from solar and wind, which are mature. But the only reason they're coming from solar and wind is because the sector of electricity has been linked to another sector like industry or transportation through a more immature technology. So immature technologies are responsible for 1/2 of the direct emissions reductions and a large chunk of the remaining 1/2 of the indirect emissions reductions. So I just want to make it very clear that when those of us who talk about innovation as a critical priority say it's so important, we're not going to start invoking the ETP and say it's at least as important as deployment. And we should have as diverse a suite of innovation policies as we do on the deployment side. And of course, as Cheryl just told us, there has to be a seamless baton handoff. You can't just have a bunch of siloed policies to support technologies and siloed policies to deploy mature ones. You have to bridge that gap and cross what we call in the space the valley of death. So that's the first point. And then one just nomenclature issue. I think we often get tripped up when we talk about what a technology is. And so what I love about this report is it goes through 800 different technology options. And so, you know, if I had to make a distinction here, I'd say carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration is not a technology. It's like an application or it's a class. And within it, there are just dozens of technology options that the IEA has evaluated here. Similarly, solar is not a technology. Silicon solar panels are a technology. Perovskite solar panels, which I promise to use in every talk I give, are another technology option. And so it's critical for us to remember that across these different classes or applications, there are some mature technologies at a high technology readiness level, and there's some immature ones. And this report shows us how some of the immature ones can really bring us rapid cost and performance and emissions gains. The second of the 4 points is that innovation needs are context specific. So what I mean by that is it will take a different set of technologies in the United States or Europe to decarbonize than it will in India or Southeast Asia. Some of the technologies will be very similar and some will be very different. For example, we're using the same solar panels, whether we're in the United States or we're in India by and large. But in these emerging economies in particular, and non-OECD Asia is going to dominate energy demand growth in the coming decades. The technology needs will be different. So for example, in India, by 2050, just to meet the insane demand for air conditioning, a different IEA report projects that India will need to add 70% of Europe's entire power system capacity just to meet air conditioning demand. And if you want to avoid what is probably an intractable addition of power system capacity, you need way more efficient air conditioners. And that's refrigerant-free and advanced air conditioners are one of the technologies that the IEA highlights in this ETP report as one of the technologies that can rise much faster in the faster innovation case, the net zero by 2050 case. Similarly, as these emerging economies build a lot of stuff, they'll build a lot of urban infrastructure, for example, they're gonna need clean cement, for example. Or as countries like Southeast Asia, India, increase road transportation, that's going to come in the form of electric 2- and 3-wheelers, for example, and heavy trucks and buses, and much less passenger sedans and SUVs like we drive in this country in the US. So it's important to customize the technologies for the case. The third point I want to make is that the faster innovation case, the net zero by 2050 that the ETP brings up, is really an exciting possibility. But as Cheryl and David mentioned, it's really hard to get a technology from the small prototype phase or the lab phase across the valley of death. What I love is that the ETP shows us 3 different attributes that can help technologies get there really fast. For example, they give the example of light emitting diodes, LEDs, which had one of the most compressed timelines to go from prototype to adoption to scale manufacturing. And the attributes they give us are, first, modular technologies, technologies that you can make in small units that repeat. Those will accrue economies of scale and learning effects very quickly because you can manufacture a lot of them and learn in a standardized fashion. And so you can imagine that electrolyzers are another example of a modular technology that Dr. Birol mentioned. The second attribute is digital enablement. I'm sure I've butchered what you meant to say, Timur, but what I mean there is that smart energy systems that harness digital technologies like artificial intelligence can have this multiplier effect. Their performance can enhance much better if you take into account digital enablers from other fields. And that brings us to the third attribute, which is spillovers. A good example of a technology that benefited from a spillover from a different field is the combined cycle gas turbine, which has risen thanks in part to spillovers or borrowed technology from the jet aviation industry. So these are some of the tips they give to technologies to achieve that faster innovation case. And then I'll finally close by saying government policies really do matter. And the ETP shows us that government policies around the world fail to correctly allocate funding to the real priorities. they tend to focus a little too much on the supply side. And I saw one of the questions, and Jason, you mentioned, often not enough on the demand side, and the different ways we need to use clean energy, whether it's in industry or transportation. So governments need to invest more in RD&D, and they need to invest more intelligently in RD&D. And that's why we're so excited to launch Energizing America next week. So thanks again.
You're doing a good job of promoting it visually because I see it over your shoulder.
Ah, yes, you do.
So you want to just say another word about give people a preview of I'm excited about it because Vern and I have been talking about this for a long time. There's often a lot of discussion about how if you're going to make more rapid progress to combat climate change, we need government to invest much more in research and innovation. It's not. I think more work needed to be done and still needs to be done on exactly how do you do that and what does history tell us about the best returns on the dollar? How do we think about where to put those funds to have maximum impact? And so that was the purpose of this study. I don't know if you want to say a word about it.
Yeah, definitely. And this study, I should give credit. This was Jason's idea. A year ago, he realized that this would be a really important question to answer. We have all these bold pledges from presidential candidates, from folks in Congress about spending a lot more money on clean energy innovation. And we wanted to give the most detailed roadmap on how exactly to spend that money in the United States and triple clean energy innovation funding to $25 billion by 2025. You, Jason, the other 400 folks watching, and my wife are now the only people to have seen this. It will launch next week, September 15th on Amazon, and we will have a Columbia University event on September 23rd at Climate Week featuring Dr. Liz Sherwood-Randall and Representative Kathy Castor, Chair of the House Select Committee. So would love to see you all there and talk about it. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Vern. Just a couple of questions. I'm going to try to work in our final 15 minutes or so, some questions that have come in also from the audience watching. And I don't know if Fatih is still there, but one of the ones that came in while he was speaking was from one of his predecessors, Nobuo Tanaka. So first of all, Nobuo says, hi and congratulations, Fatih. And if he's there, or Timur, maybe you can take it, or anyone can take it. The question was sort of about the connection between this report and the report that we also hosted the IEA to talk about recently on sustainable recovery plans and green stimulus, and how well people are doing at that, and how do you access more stimulus plans and more stimulus monies and get more people, are people being ambitious enough, and if not, what prospects does the IEA see to help accelerate that?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Unfortunately, Fatih Birol had to leave, so I'll do my best to pick that up. And
please tell him Nobuo said hello.
I'll certainly be happy to convey Mr. Tanaka's wishes to Fatih. He was executive director. I was already here when Mr. Tanaka was here, so I very much enjoyed working with him. Now, the way we have approached the COVID pandemic this year is in effect three different steps. Number one, we made assessments of what COVID means for the energy sector, what it means for CO2 emissions, energy use, what it means for investments. Number two, we had we made suggestions on what governments can do to get out of the crisis in a sustainable type of manner, which is the background to the Sustainable Recovery Report. And number three is we had a major Clean Energy Transition Summit in the beginning of July to discuss all these various different aspects. Now, what we've been doing is, of course, we've been, for the ETP publication, we've been working very closely with our colleagues in the World Energy Outlook team to see how some of the sustainable recovery packages can be, or what are the sustainable recovery packages that can be put together, and to see what they actually mean for our net zero emissions pathways moving forward. And some of these targets, such as, for example, those having been brought forward by the European Union for hydrogen, they have been incorporated in these type of pathways in order to see what they mean for actually reaching net zero emissions. And we do see a lot of action by many countries around the world. Very recently, The government here in France has brought forward new measures. So we're seeing many countries putting an emphasis on sustainable recovery in the way that it has been suggested here from our end in summer.
Thank you. I want to ask another question that came in from the audience, which I think reflects some skepticism that some people watching this may have listening to the conversation and reading the report, which is about how quickly we need to move toward rapid decarbonization and how much hope one should put in things that aren't quite there yet. So the questioner asks, is saying that CCS and hydrogen are promising just placing undue hope on technologies that aren't where solar was 10 years ago or don't have a path to affordability that solar may have? Who wants to take that? I think it reflects a view that many people watching might have, or a question they might have.
I can give it a start if you wish. Naturally, I mean, when you look at hydrogen, for example, hydrogen had many false starts in the past. It's not the first time. I mean, we are certainly in a situation right now where we are discussing hydrogen as a new and emerging technologies, but it's not a technology that we haven't been discussing in the past. I made my PhD on that subject some 1.5 decades ago. I have colleagues who worked on hydrogen at previous hype cycles some 30 years ago. So there is a skepticism that I completely understand. It is a very natural kind of expectation. But there are some concrete, I think what has changed compared to the past is, number one, technology improvements have been significant. Electrolyzers have been mentioned, but we're also seeing very strongly falling costs for hydrogen fuel cells, for example. We are seeing real tangible problems that people need to grapple with in the energy sector, and net zero emission just requires technology solutions such as hydrogen, such as CCUS. It will be very, very difficult to get out of the emissions in heavy industries and parts of long distance transport if you don't have CCUS or hydrogen available at significant scale. So I understand that skepticism. It's not, there were false starts, no doubts about that. But I think we should also remind ourselves that technologies such as solar PV did not come to us overnight. In fact, as we were starting to work on this particular report on energy technology perspectives, I asked one of my colleagues to see when solar PV emerged the first time in our IEA energy balances. And this was in 1983, in fact, in the United States. And it took from there roughly 30 years to make it to 1% of global electricity generation. So these times, and Varun mentioned that earlier, are very long. Technology innovation is not like a linear process that goes from the beginning to an end goal and then you have it. You have setbacks, etc. But in many ways, I think, given the widespread attention that these technologies enjoy today, given the actual need to deploy them for real critical challenges in the energy sector, and there are many more that we can be discussing, I think there is a good momentum now for these technologies, and it's a momentum that we need to leverage on in order to reach our long-term climate targets.
I was just going to add another comment. You know, to Timur's last point, though, the length of time that it takes, right, of 30 years, 40 years to really get to the point that we look back and then say we were surprised how things happened, right? The delays in the path, but then the speed at which it eventually hits a tipping point and comes down. So our ability to predict well is bad. And so I think the concern of, we're just going to try to put hydrogen infrastructure everywhere and it's going to be stranded assets. I think there's this whole fear of that. But I think that's why road mapping, country level commitments, understanding the use scenarios that could provide critical mass of first applications becomes super important, because you want to then share. And one of the points that I think is made well in the report about sharing learnings. And I think that's where both things like mission innovation, but also some of these platforms become really important. You want to take the best practices and then rapidly deploy them and understand from a government perspective where on the cost curve should you enter? What kind of things, you know, do you have to bring to bear? I mean, I do have concerns that infrastructure challenges, like, you know, I mean, you know, DC, right? High voltage DC, and you know, putting up electrical transmission in the U.S. is non-trivial. And I think the same thing as you look at, can you set up a gas infrastructure system? But if we don't look at the enabling features and the costs and the options across all the scenarios that everybody's running around the world, we'll just fail. And 30 years will pass and we'll look back and say, should have done some things differently. So I don't think, I think the IEA is really willing to reconsider as we look at this and go forward, right? That something has changed where it's more enabling or less enabling.
Very quickly, I really want to underscore this point. I don't think past needs to be prologue. If you look at solar, it was such a messy history. It was, you know, invented in 1954. The US supported R&D, then the US stopped supporting R&D. Japan took it up, then Germany did, and eventually we got to where we are today after 75 years. Going forward with the road mapping approach that Cheryl mentioned, in this exquisitely complicated, intricate set of 800 options, we can shrink and compress those timelines, especially if we focus on the technologies that have most promise, even though we're not perfect forecasters. I think we can do a whole lot better than what we did with solar, and we shouldn't take that as a, you know, it's a cautionary tale, but it's not a, it doesn't preclude us from doing far better.
Yeah, that's the point. Well taken. And as long as we're looking over your shoulder, I'll note one of the best books, I think, on solar innovation is also over your shoulder because you wrote it, Taming the Sun. Actually, it's over mine too, people. So I wanted to talk about another question. You know, it's a lot of work we do at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and that I do, is looking at the intersections of climate, energy, and foreign policy and national security. And I wrote another piece recently in Foreign Policy about that, about how really an ambitious climate strategy needs to go beyond what might narrowly be considered climate to really integrate climate considerations throughout many of our foreign policy priorities. So our colleague, Varun John Elkind, asks a question along those lines on international trade and the international economic agenda, which is, in his view, kind of key to the enabling frameworks, that to deploy clean energy technologies and adapt them to fit well in applications in emerging markets, which is particularly critical, we need international trade. And he expresses a concern that we may be living in a time when support for trade is under increasing threat. So the question is, what other enabling frameworks may be needed that would be critically important for innovative clean energy technologies to get us where they need to go globally at the scale that we need? I can call on someone unless one of you wants to jump in.
I'll jump in quickly. So I think John is absolutely right. Robust and free trade is going to be critical to both developing better new technologies and then deploying them. And at any point in the supply chain, if you introduce a trade barrier, it drives up the cost of the entire finished product. And look, I just came from India where, you know, we have these safeguard duties on solar panels. They drive up the cost of clean energy. And you can see the objective is to try and have a industrial policy at home to support industry, but it can be destructive. Going forward, I think countries need to come together to agree on ways to reduce trade barriers to the free flow of clean energy goods, especially supply chains, to enable improvements to be made to technologies. But beyond that, we also need countries to agree on acceptable subsidies at home, because at the end of the day, countries will want to benefit, to reap some of the economic benefits and economic development from the clean energy transition, and they'll want to create their industries at home. Supporting industries at home through subsidies, while also avoiding trade barriers that raise the cost of clean energy, is probably the way to strike that balance, in my opinion.
We only have a minute or two left, but Timur, there were a couple of questions about specific technologies. One was about whether the report downplays the potential for advanced nuclear technology. And I wonder if you could talk about your views on innovation in the nuclear space. Another was on the outlook for hydrogen. We talked, and Fatih talked about electrolyzers, but how I think the report speaks to this, that actually we're going to see more blue hydrogen, more gas for steam reformation with carbon capture, and then over time, green will probably be the one that grows at a much faster rate. But if you could talk about the how you see the different hydrogen technologies playing out.
Yeah, in our report we did not want to put a very strong emphasis here on decarbonizing the power sector. I think this is not a matter of downplaying anything. We're obviously aware of the various different technology that opportunities are out there, SMRs, etc. So they have that modularity aspect, in fact, in some ways that Varun was mentioning before. So as the IEA, we have put out a report last year just on nuclear, what important role it can play for decarbonizing the power sector, lifetime extensions, but also innovative technologies. But this was not the particular focus of this report. We really tried to dive into some of the aspects that drive the transitions in end-use sectors, those in particular that are sometimes referred to as hard-to-abate sectors, in long-distance transport, in heavy industry. So this is just part of that type of consideration. Now, when it comes to clean hydrogen production, there is clearly a space for CCS-based technologies. In fact, in our projections, from the top of my head, I think 60% of the contribution of clean hydrogen production growth comes from electrolyzers, and around 40% comes from CCS. There is a clear near-term opportunity. If you look at how hydrogen is being produced today, it is by and large from natural gas, and in China in particular from coal, associated with 800 million tons of CO2 emissions. Just addressing these emissions will there's a strong role for CCS to play, and we're going to be discussing that particular place of CCS in the context of clean hydrogen production as part of our new report, and as Varun has been advertising his, and I'm looking forward to the launch next week. I'll advertise ours. It's coming up in 10 or 14 days of time. I don't remember the exact date now, but it will dive into precisely these type of aspects.
Great. Well, we look forward to having you back to talk about that. And thanks to you and to Fatih for all the work on this really impressive report, and for spending time with us this morning on the release date to talk about it. Cheryl and Varun, thanks for your insights. I want to thank all of you, and thank our audience for tuning in this morning. As I mentioned at the outset, the full video recording of this event will be available on our website in a few days. Please stay tuned to all the upcoming events at the Center on Global Energy Policy, including, as Varun mentioned, the release of Energizing America. And then I'll just mention as well that the Center on Global Energy Center on Global Energy Policy has partnered this year with Climate Week in New York to curate a series of events as the partner on international and domestic policy. A series of virtual events beginning September 21st. Topics include the impact of the energy transition on global health and economic prosperity, green recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, food systems and climate change, environmental justice, and much more. You can find the full list of events for Climate Week on the Center on Global Energy Policy's website. So thank you again. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day. We will see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.